So I think we can get started. And I guess as the moderator for this breakout session, I should say hello and welcome to everyone. I am also going to take the liberty to say that the timing of the session is hard. I'm sure that, like many of you, you're probably glued to the TV or social media in relation to this verdict. So I just want to take the liberty to just say to take what you need, take the space that you need. I plan to do the same, even as the moderator of this session. I just have to be candid in saying that. I was asked to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. If anyone has, I guess, any issues with that, I think you can go off screen, but just want everyone to know that it is being recorded. So by introduction, my name is Sherry Powell. I am the executive director of the recently launched Rural America Chamber of Commerce. We are a national organization that is committed to supporting entrepreneurs and small business owners throughout rural communities in the country. We are 2 months old, and so very new and informative in nature, but already feel that we're making some of the impact that we're committed to. Is how do we promote each other, support each other, and as a collective of rural entrepreneurs, use our collective voice and power to affect change. So as you all know, the topic of this breakout session is focused on the social contract that we as rural entrepreneurs have to our communities and vice versa. In the description, we talk about how we all are so used to the mandates and the accountability that we hold big companies to, the Fortune 500s and the Fortune 100s. We expect from them to do so many things along the lines of social impact, social change, and et cetera. And so one of the things that I often say, and really one of the catalysts for starting this organization, is the truth and the realization that no one is coming to save us in rural America. Big manufacturing companies are no longer coming into our towns. The infrastructure projects barely come to our towns. It's time for us to stop waiting for someone to save us. And to that end, we have to take our power, hold our power, and affect change ourselves, which is really the impetus for this breakout session. Is what is the social contract that we hold to our own communities, versus waiting for someone else to come in and really make the change that we so desperately need and want. So to that end, I am thrilled and honored to have 3 of our members, Rural Chamber members from different parts of the country, to serve as panelists today to talk about this topic, to share their experience, their views, and their perspectives on this important topic. I am going to turn it over to Kendra, Lance, and Jennifer to introduce themselves. And after that, we will go into some questions. And then we hope to leave time at the end as well for some Q&A from everyone on the call. So as they come up, feel free to drop them in the chat. And also at the end, we can open the floor up for folks to just chime in, whatever feels natural and easy for everyone. So, but thank you all so much for being here. We're grateful and very much looking forward to the conversation. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. I just love for the 3 of you to just take some time to briefly introduce who you are, where you are, and your entrepreneurial focus in business and what you do.
Sure. So glad to be here. Thank you, Sherry. And thanks, Lance and Kendra. It's nice to see your faces, tiny screen. My name is Jennifer Drinkwater. I grew up in Mississippi. I live in Ames, Iowa, in Story County, and I'm an artist. I started something called the What's Good Project back in 2018. And essentially what I do is I visit communities and talk to community members about what's good where they live, and then create paintings based on those conversations. And the paintings and the stories, with their permission, are posted to a website. Any sales, I reinvest 20% of all profits back to that community. And those monies are gone. They go to a nonprofit organization that was designated by the interviewee, which is kind of the main bent of my business. But I'm also an educator here at Iowa state. And yeah, just happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Lance?
Hi, my name is Lance Trowich. I'm CEO and co-owner of Event Groove. Event Groove is an events and fundraising platform. We're based out of rural Montana, as well as virtual. And I'm happy to be here to talk about rural issues and rural communities.
Thank you, Lance. And Kendra?
Hey everyone, I'm Kendra. I am sitting here on Lenape land, or some people know it as the Catskills area of New York, just about 2 hours north of New York City. I am an herbalist, activist, and I run a shop called The Herbal Scoop that is dedicated to claiming the stories of Black and Brown people, specifically Black and Brown herbalists that have been lost through or for several different reasons. So I directly work on reclaiming and sharing that information to my community. I do run a botanical shop where people are invited to kind of step into the driver's seat of their own wellness and start to discover plants that make them feel really good and get their body working in the way that it was originally intended to. In everything that I do, part of my core values is supporting Black and Brown folks to be able to have the access to their own health, their own plants, their ability to be able to grow, food security, things like that, that are woven into the values of my business and the action of my business. So I'm excited to share what that really looks like from a very small part of New York.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you all. And I actually want to open this this question up to each of you as well. If you will just individually take your time to tell us in your own words, what was it about this topic in this panel discussion that compelled you to say yes and to show up and to share your views on it, if that makes sense. Kendra, do you want to share your perspective on that?
Sure. I mean, when you asked me and I found out the topic, there was no hesitation about that. My activist work and the work of supporting my community is so intertwined with the way that I set up my business. I don't see them as separate. So when you asked me to share and like come on and speak about this, it was I was like honored.
Everyone, because
so that's the reason why I feel so passionate about us opening or having businesses in rural parts of America and holding ourselves accountable to find ways within what we have available to us to make an impact. I think, like you said, these are marginalized and forgotten communities. Like here in Sullivan County, there are some people who still don't have access to Wi-Fi, which is outrageous considering what we're going through right now. So yeah, we're definitely forgotten. We're 2 hours from New York City, and there's some people who do not have access to Wi-Fi, and we have online school and everybody's working from home. So just things like that I was like, if I don't or we as a collective don't, we can't expect these big companies to come in and save us.
And Lance, I know that you're in a position where you employ quite a sizable team. And so I know that you do quite a bit of work and thoughts, leadership around these issues in terms of the impact that you and your company provides to rural communities in Montana. And so I'd love to hear your views on this as well. What compelled you not only to show up for this discussion, but also for all the work that you've been doing along these lines over years?
Yeah. So just to give you a quick background, so we've been in business 22 years. And the core of the business is in a small town called Harleton. Harleton is population 900. It's in the middle of central Montana. And Harleton used to be a major rail terminus for the Milwaukee Railroad. So 3,000 jobs, most, all union paid. In 1977, the railroad shut down and everything evaporated. So when you think of networks, that network shut down. The advent, of course, of the internet gave the founder of our company, Mike Yinger, the ability to go to a small town, find an amazing, set of people who are willing and able to work, who are underemployed or if not unemployed. And then he founded the company in 1999 there. So I came on board in 2007. And since then, we've expanded to the UK, Australia, Canada. We've added a full online events and ticketing platform, a full online fundraising platform. And we employ 20 people in this extremely poor county. It's a hub zone county, and about 20 part-time. And then we also have 7 virtual customer support people who are generally out of rural areas, including literally, ranches out of Montana. So I grew up in small towns in Idaho, and then my family's background is in, again, small towns. What really compelled me to kind of, to come to this panel and talk about it is what's most important, at least for us, around really the contract or, advocacy, is really keeping the company alive. And so, and therefore, if we keep the company alive, and we do this over decades, the overall cumulative impact on the small town, which again, is still struggling. It's not, it's still, somewhat in decline, I would say, but it enables us to at least have a core beachhead that we can also show people that they can kind of create almost with tech companies, this concept of hub and spoke. Why not have your spokes out in rural America? And that's what I'm passionate about. And so the advocacy we bring is, number one, with my team, is like, we got to keep the company going. We compete globally. We have tons of competitors. We have to do everything we can to keep the company alive, which is providing jobs. Number two is, the other part of the contract is growing, because if you grow, obviously, then you're more defensible. You keep more people employed, but then you can also start, adding more jobs throughout rural America. And really the third part is we have, in any given year, a good year, not 2020, by the way, we have about 78,000 customers, and that's usually growing. Those range from nonprofits to education to sports and rec to entertainment, et cetera. So really, when you look at the causes we could support, even in our own community, I mean, there's a lot we could support. So what we decided as a team is we can't support everything. It's just too hard. We're too small. So we're just going to focus on one kind of mission, one social advocacy. And that really is, in terms of ESG or environmental social governance, it's really around the environment. So we decided to focus on conservation, where all of our power is wind powered, because we're right next to a big wind farm. Every shipment is carbon neutral, but more so than that, we really give back in terms of, volunteer time, as well as just outright donations for projects to save habitat. And that's important for our town, and it's important for our team, because, there isn't much to do in Arlington in terms of entertainment. So you want to recreate, and you need national forests to do that, and state public lands. So that's kind of what, kind of our, background and what we're passionate about.
Thank you, Lance. Jennifer, did you want to share any reactions to that question?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I'd say yes to probably anything you asked me to participate in, Sherry. So there's that. But I feel like I'm kind of a newbie, I guess, in the business game. I identify more as an artist. And so about business and even kind of like how the art world can help. And I held off from pursuing art as a career, and certainly pursuing business as a career, because I didn't feel like I wasn't aware of ways it could give back. And so now, later in midlife, realizing that there are a lot of practitioners and people that I can learn from and look up to and admire, I was excited to participate in this, just because I feel like there are, you can apply business creatively like you do art. It's just a matter of like understanding what your value systems are and then trying to create an entrepreneur, like create a business structure that supports those values.
Very, very good. And somewhat related to that, my next question, and typically I just want everyone to know, I typically don't like when I'm moderating to do 1, 2, 3, but these questions, I do desperately want to hear each of your perspectives on it. So this seems more mechanical than it should be, but and I'm going to say that this question is really heavy. And so I apologize in advance for that, but I do think it's important. And what the question is from where you sit as a small town, rurally based entrepreneur and business leader, do you personally feel a responsibility and an accountability in terms of advocacy beyond your bottom line? I know that each of you have built successful businesses, you've built strong communities and customer bases, you've built strong social media followings. I mean, there's work that goes into each of those in time. And so given that, as an entrepreneur in rural America, do you also feel it's a responsibility that you hold to teach and to empower your folks to be advocates? And if you do believe that, how have you taken that responsibility out into your rural community? Big question, I know, but I do think it's to me, that's the core of this conversation. So I'd love to hear your reactions to that or your responses to that. Jennifer?
Sure. So yes, 100%, absolutely agree that advocacy is hugely important. In my day job, I teach and I work for Iowa State Extension and Outreach. So that's kind of what I'm paid to do. And I feel like I wouldn't have done this without the advocacy work. Like there was no real, the advocacy is what created the business. Actually, it was traveling around, being from Mississippi, traveling around Iowa, rural Iowa, and seeing these stories and meeting these people who are doing this hard, heavy, courageous work that is not being shared, is not being promoted. It's not the dominant narrative. And how could I use art in a way to get those stories, provide more of a platform or provide a platform. I'm not going to pretend that I have some, massive media following at all, but to help amplify what these citizens and community members are doing. And so that's the impetus of the whole thing. And then it was a matter of figuring out the pragmatism of that. Like, what does that look like? How can I not just be a social media platform, but how can I also divest money back into these communities, into some of these nonprofits? I made a very clear decision I don't have gallery representation. And for those people who maybe aren't familiar with kind of the art world, galleries usually take 40 to 60% of any sales. And so if I choose not to use a gallery, then how can I reinvest that money back into those communities? And what does that look like? And who are the nonprofits that are being supported? So yeah, absolutely. The advocacy it's the crux of everything, for sure. And I also, part of what I do too is I have a blog. I've been lax this semester. It's a little tough, but every month I pay an artist to interview them, a community-based artist who do social justice and social advocacy work too. And interview them, again, is like a way of sharing what they're doing, providing a different audience for their work, and then also paying them for their time too. So that's super important, is paying artists for what they do and providing monetary value back in that. Does that answer?
That's beautiful. And I love that last part. And I think that I love that so much, because I think about when so many of us who are based in rural America, we sort of look for that type of assistance from outside of our communities. And for you to say that you actually provide that within your community, I think is powerful. And that's the genesis of all of this. And so thank you for sharing that. Kendra?
I echo what Jennifer said about, this advocacy had to be a part of the core values of what I do. Just with the nature of the work, like I work with plants, I work with nature. That is not for me, I never wanted it to feel exclusive. I never wanted it to feel like people didn't have access to this information, because for so long, it's been free, right? Like you can go to parks and you can, interact with plants. And I've worked in the wellness community for, almost 15 years. And it's, as a person who looks like me and identifies like me, it's very difficult to feel comfortable in these spaces, whether it's a yoga studio or a meditation session, foraging walks, all of these things. You feel a little boxed in. You don't feel like you quite belong. So as a person of, like, again, how I identify, I wanted to make sure that in my business, I was actively doing something every day, if not multiple times a day, to remove that barrier. And so that was kind of like the first way that I stepped in, with the way that I share information, with the way that I teach, with the way that I offer access to my workshops, and then continue to do more and more as I go on. It's just me, and I run this business and I'm the one who's doing the advocacy, and I'm also an herbal farmer as well. So there's a lot of hats that I carry. So in my business plan, what can I do without burnout? What can I do that is going to make a lasting impact, whether it be big or small. So I always go back to teaching. I'm a teacher at heart. So when I offer up opportunities for people to grab this knowledge, where I offer people to come into my shop and kind of play around, there's a lot of different ways that I wanted to show up that were beyond just dollars and cents, like moving it around to different nonprofit organizations, but really centering my action to, kind of one-on-one or even in small groups, really offer opportunities for people to say, hey, like, this belongs to me as well. And if I can do that on my level, my hope is that continues to ripple through. And so that this access that has been cut off to marginalized communities is now there and available for anyone who wants to, interact with it.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Kendra. Lance?
Yeah, so I talked about kind of our focus on conservation and the environment. I think the other aspect of employing people in a small town for a number of years is, and one that I'm proud of in terms of our team and just kind of our culture, is as you all know, you probably live in small towns. I grew up in small towns. Sometimes they can be pretty judgmental, and sometimes people hit rough spots. Sometimes people get addicted, right? And sometimes people struggle with substance addiction. Sometimes they even struggle with crimes, etc. So there's no formal program, but what we've said just informally, and what our culture essentially does, is we give people a second chance. So if we, I have a number of different examples where, an individual, is coming off substance addiction and the worst type, as you can imagine, in rural America. And they've been unreliable at other employers in the town, but we'll give them a second chance, and we'll just give them hopefully a benevolent place, come in and just start to get going again. And as we all know, the empowerment of work just cannot be understated. It's just so important to lift those people and give them something they can be proud of. And it might be just packaging and boxing, our orders, but doing it in a real, in a professional way that they can feel proud of. So I would say that's another area we're really, focused on. And again, not in an informal way, but just giving them the opportunity to work.
Yeah. So, and just given what you three just shared, I'd love to hear, you've both, all three of you are clear in terms of the catalyst and the motivation to hold your social contract to your community high and strong. But along that journey, has there been any challenges, any pushback from fellow entrepreneurs in the community, any stakeholders in the rural community, because as we know, these small towns are insular. And so I think everyone on the Zoom call knows the dynamics along those lines in a small rural town. So given that, has there been any challenges or any pushback or any obstacles that you face in terms of trying to live your values as a business owner in rural America?
I'll jump in. Honestly, I don't think so, because we're just well supported by the town, and the challenges that we've had is really around infrastructure. It's around broadband. It's around UPS or FedEx distribution networks, and getting enough service. I think one kind of core challenge, though, and this is endemic to rural communities, let alone anywhere else, is just the challenge of getting better education in the small towns, because sometimes people have quit high school, and let's say they walk in asking for a job at age 16. To some extent, the education is just not there where it should be for a 16-year-old. And so that is, I would say, has been kind of our core challenge. And then, of course, we address that through a lot of training, et cetera. But I think that is probably the core challenge, at least for us.
Jennifer, did you or Kendra have anything to share along any obstacles or challenges you faced? Or
I feel like because I'm in such an early phase of kind of growing this business, that my own ignorance is probably the biggest challenge of like not having business background, and sort of the challenge of just kind of keeping myself up to date with what I need to be doing, and learning kind of marketing and all of that. And then also I guess having the time to like scale and devote. I work out of my garage studio behind me, it's a little bit small, so trying to find an affordable larger studio space at this point is a challenge, just with costs of rent and everything like that. But yeah, that's been mainly the big one, I think.
Yeah.
I just to be completely honest with everyone who's on this call, 99% of the work and the things that I talk about are for the BIPOC community. I'm also an ally to the LGBTQIA+ community. And so I do a lot of talking and kind of shaking things up in different forums, the way that I speak to people in my shop, the way I have, been on different interviews and stuff like that. So I do get, why are you supporting them sort of questions, or don't you think we, kind of this, we all deserve this, that sort of rhetoric that kind of comes my way. And that I get hit with that through social media and kind of like unsolicited DMs. I've had people, say, in small town, like conversations, like say and not say stuff like, oh yeah, I heard that interview that you did. That was interesting, and kind of like walk away. And I just like, I'm really unapologetic about it. Like, I just don't have the time for that. Like, if you don't have time for the way that I send my message, like, you can move on and that's fine. That is not going to deter me from the things that I want to do and the opportunities that I'm trying to build on a daily. But I do get a lot of pushback. I've shut down complete forums, and not in a, like, I don't put any like medals or anything behind that, but just these conversations get so tense when we talk about, like, in the herbal world, how are we using our work to support Indigenous communities? How are we creating language that is inclusive for all identities? And when I bring these things up and other people continue to also show up in these conversations, people get really uncomfortable. They feel called out. They feel all of these different things. And so it can be pretty intense. And that has probably been my biggest hurdle is like that other people who aren't included in the conversation or people who are being called out to do the work are having a really difficult time accepting that assignment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's an entirely, it's a whole separate hour-long seminar or webinar. And hopefully we can have that conversation under another umbrella at some point, because I think it is an important one to have. And so I am actually going to pose another question that's that could be considered a bit heavy, but I also think it's fair to to have holistic conversations around this, because some entrepreneurs in small town USA could be a part of this conversation right now and say, well, I'm just trying to keep the doors open. I'm just trying to keep my business going. I don't have time to think about social impact and social change and, community, leading a community. I just have to keep my business going. So for you three to say that you believe in advocacy and you believe in holding the social contract from a rural entrepreneur perspective with the rural community, that's all based in privilege, because I just need to make money and I need to, just survive. So I'd love to just hear your reaction to that sentiment, if you have one. And I know for sure there are people not necessarily on this webinar, but I know that is a belief, because as the person who gets to lead this chamber, I have those conversations multiple times a week. And so along those lines, just know that it is a true sentiment, and I'd love for you to react to it.
Basically just that this is
I can touch on that. I don't necessarily see it as a privilege, but this is just my opinion. And complete facts, like I'm trying to just pay my bills and keep the everything running. Absolutely. You're running a business. This is not your volunteer project. I don't think the two have to be separate. And I don't think that your social impact has to be something that costs money. You don't have to donate a part of your profits. You don't have to offer something for free, but it's from my perspective of the way that I've structured things around the idea of mutual aid. Like I'll call the community and say like, hey, who can show up and help with this? So I'm gonna, as an example from like the farming and growing community, there might be people in your community who have seeds that you could give out to people so that people have access to grow some of the very simple vegetables, which costs you maybe a little bit of time or a few emails and organization, but may not bring you out of your bottom line. Or maybe you hop on one of these calls and you share your story with people who you feel like are part of your community. I don't want people to think that advocacy means money or means that you have to buy something else or spend or take away, because in rural communities, yeah, we are dealing with usually we're dealing with a smaller population and maybe a smaller revenue stream. But I don't think that that is what advocacy has to be. It doesn't have to equal money. I think it has to equal something that you're passionate about and finding a way to help those people that you feel like you can have an impact. And for me, I just feel like that idea of like, I'm just trying to make money is great. And then I also think about the flip side of that is like, okay, I have money, but does my neighbor, do these people and that people, how can I continue to help them grow? Because am I free if they're not free, right? Like that's what I think about. So as a new business who is not making profit yet, just as the way that goes, and I'm an herbalist, so you can come in and buy a bunch of herbs and your tab might be like $22. And I'm like, thank you so much. But I don't feel, again, I'm just going to state it again, I don't feel like it has to be money in the way that you show up for your social contract.
I actually had a conversation just this morning with a potential chamber member, and she posed a very direct question, and it was basically along the lines of, well, I work 12 hours a day on my craft and getting it to shops and getting it to the markets during the season. And so she was like, so I don't have time to care about the digital divide in my community. And what made me think about it is the point that you just made. Well, in a small town, the condition of your neighbor, and I'm not saying it's not the same in a Brooklyn, New York, or Portland, Oregon, but it's so, so important, right? Don't you want to be sure that the high school kid on, 2 miles down the road can do his or her homework, right? And so it's exactly what you just said. It's not in a town like where we all live, you just can't care about self. As an entrepreneur, as a citizen, as a resident, it doesn't matter. The insular nature of rural communities is just so different than I think anyone else in this country experiences. So all of that to say, Kendra, I completely agree. Lance or Jennifer, did you want to share any perspective on that question?
I don't know that I could say it any better than what Kendra just said. I think that was right on, I mean, I think she's right. It doesn't have to be about money. It doesn't have to be about financial investment. It doesn't have to be about anything. It can be about, I mean, you can get creative. Like, I guess part of what's important to me in terms of my own practice is being a model of difference for young artists, of how they can be kind of in the world and in their communities too. And so taking, younger people in your field under your wing and mentoring them for an hour a week. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything. I don't know how you make people care. That's another question, but no, I agree wholeheartedly with what she said.
Yeah, I would just add on top of Kendra's and Jennifer's comments that people work hard, and my team, and our team, we work hard, and it can't be just about profits, to ensure the company survives. That's important, obviously, but it has to have more meaning, and especially, in good times, even in these small towns, the unemployment rate is quite low, actually. And so to recruit, right, to be, the next hires, they got to know that you have more in it than just profits, whether it's your focus on the local community, and whether it's, kind of the activities you do, it has to be more than that. So for us, at our most elemental level, what we tell new hires is, listen, we're here to help people with their events and fundraisers. Events and fundraisers across the country, no matter what they are stressful, they're costly, and people's hearts go into them. So we're here to help them in the most elemental way. And then number two is we're here to, continue building a company that continues to provide good paying jobs in a place where there are none. And so that's part of the mission here. And I think I completely agree with Kendra. You can do both. There's no question.
Lance, I actually have a follow-up question for you. And I know you talked a bit in your opening in terms of the evolution of Event Groove, and really how the founder, how he came about the real estate. But in terms of the company and its and the way that it does give back so much to rural Montana, would you say that was more of an organic evolution and it just felt like the right thing to do, or did something specific and tangible happen to serve as the catalyst to exist as a company that gives back so much to the area?
Yeah, I think it was more organic, and we see every day, in any given year, where printed tickets still happen. So one side of our business is printed tickets. We'll print over 90 million tickets, and as you kind of go through the racks in our facility up there where the orders are placed, it's kind of amazing what people are doing. I mean, from a high school raffle, right, to kind of add money to the Education Foundation, to social justice, fundraisers and events. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's really all walks of life. And when we saw that, we realized, and again, it's organic, right? But we just realized, that we are, in a small way, we're just helping people here. And so then we started having a broader conversation, okay, can we do more? And more in the community, especially around, at least when we first started, broadband issues, because broadband was horrendously bad, and we would have had to have moved the company to a larger city had it not been upgraded and fixed. But then also to for instance, Mike, the founder of the company, started a little high school programming class, and he got 4 volunteers, 2 of whom went on to have full-on careers as software developers. And in fact, they're software developers today. So I would say it's more organic, but again, it just you can do more, and as Kendra said, it doesn't have to involve money.
So I would love, Tyler, do we have until 6 Eastern time? Is that right?
You have until 6:30 Eastern time, yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, very good. I would love to ask the 3 of you if if you have any, and not to put you on the spot here, but if you have any really advice or suggestions for any fellow rural entrepreneurs who may be on this Zoom, in terms of just based on your own experience, ways to to really just hold that social contract seriously and to lean into it, right? Because as we started the Zoom, just knowing that, there are no saviors, right? It's up to us, right? And so just thinking about that responsibility, that accountability, and really just how do you put this in action as someone who currently isn't? Any words that you could share along those lines would be great and welcome.
I think for me, and I have these conversations with folks a lot, is because signing your name in this social contract could feel overwhelming. And as an entrepreneur in a rural community, we can't do it all. We don't have the time. We may not have the resources, so on and so forth. So get clear on what you can do, who you can help, right? And I think that frees us up from the guilt of not being able to help this cause or that cause. You're like, okay, I'm working really hard on this specific thing, and here's how I can, as a person, as a community, as a business, continue to show up for whatever community you decide that you can have an impact with. So that's what I always tell people, is just like, choose something small. It can always grow bigger. It might be the food pantry in town. It might be mentoring high school students. There's lots of opportunity there, and there in our community there's lots of people that could use some help or some motivation or some sort of gift. So I think just getting really clear about who you can help and what you can do, and let yourself off the hook that you're not writing those giant checks with the red bow on the front. Like, that doesn't mean that you're doing the best. Like, showing up and serving meals or offering free seeds or mentoring someone and sharing your skills can be really, really powerful. You just never know how that ripples and continues on. So I always say that that's like really the first thing. Get really clear about what you can do and who you want to support, and start small and go from there.
I love that advice. Yeah.
I would add too that to support other community organizations by showing up to event. I mean, and not in COVID times, but normal, when things are back to normal, but show up, ask questions, be a good listener, ask how you can help, what people need. I think sometimes we get we assume we know what people need. We assume we know how we can help our community when we don't take the time to really ask those questions and listen and to support. That's been helpful for me, for sure.
Yeah, Kendra said it, perfectly. And I also liked what Jennifer said around showing up and creating community. The worst thing you can do is get everyone so excited and then go after so many different causes and so many different, well-meaning, activities that everyone, you don't have that much impact, and B, people get exhausted, right? They're working full-time jobs. They're trying to do this and this and that. So focus on one thing, take small actions over time, accumulate and have impact. And I think as we've said, and as the team believes, if we just take in some action, that's important, and feel good about it. We can't solve all the problems, but we can take small actions that have impact.
And so, and actually, I wanted to ask too, and Jennifer, this touches a bit on the topic that you just brought up in terms of showing up and supporting your fellow rural business leader or business owner or entrepreneur. And so along those lines, have either of you been intentional in terms of forming partnerships with fellow entrepreneurs in your community to achieve something, a goal? I know, Kendra, I know that you and Callicoon Pantry have a really close relationship and have taken stances together on some of these social issues. And so I was just wondering if there's been any other partnerships in your rural town that have come to fruition based on trying to make a difference and a change in that town.
Ames is fortunate. We have a really pretty amazing and special arts community. And I have a couple of friends who purchased an old grain elevator west of town and transformed it into this kind of like arts spot cafe. It's called Lockwood Cafe in Reliable Street. And they have a community garden, a free community thrift store. And we've kind of partnered a lot over the years together to kind of co-host events. I've had student projects over there, and just to keep that community. It's a very active organization in the neighborhood. There's no restaurants or coffee shops or anything, so it's a pretty active space. But yeah, that's been a really great, awesome partnership over the years. But yeah, it's just about showing up and asking how you can help.
I'll add a small thing. We, in breweries, of course, like everywhere else, are popping up left and right in Montana. And what we're finding, as I'm sure everywhere else, is the brewery becomes a new kind of gathering center. So the coffee shop's open till 2, but then the brewery is a community kind of gathering center in these communities, mainly because, at least in Montana, you can only have 3 beers and you have to close down at 8. So it's kind of, it's well lighted. It's not your classic bar scene, although kids are allowed in bars in Montana. But we've partnered with them to allow them to have a whole kind of beer garden on our empty lot, as well as to promote music, right? And on Friday nights, which was prior to the brewery, was unheard of. And that, again, anything to kind of build community, bring people together. And especially in our community, given that it's primarily agriculture and getting, the families off the ranches and to come into town, it just does so much for community spirit.
Yeah.
I agree. Collaborating with people in town, and I've even collaborated with people on social media. It also just, it's like that, 2 heads are better than 1 kind of situation where it's like, okay, what can we do? I'm kind of stuck. Well, is there something new? Is there something that would be more helpful? Like, what is your community saying? Are there any things that we can do that kind of fit both of our value systems. Like I find that that creative process also really refreshing. And it helps to just get some new energy behind some of the things that we are, called to do. I teamed up with an herbalist and we were able to send out mutual aid herbal packs to people around the community. I think we were able to do close to 50 just by using things that we had and being able to, donate jars and packages and herbs and all of these other things. And I think that I wouldn't have thought of that as a thing that I could do on my own, but putting the energy behind more than one person doing this work, it was possible to kind of send out those mutual aid packets to people in that way. So I think collaborating and finding other people in your community that you guys are both kind of vibing in the same way can be really impactful.
Fully agree. This is great, Tyler. I actually am happy to open this up to some audience questions if any has come in, and then we will. Oh, there are some in the chat, and so happy to take some of these. Let me just scroll up to the top.
Perfect. So one of the first questions we actually received from Laura A. Bucksbaum. And so she was wondering, what is the need for the Rural America Chamber of Commerce? How do you all support rural businesses, and how are you thinking about the social and economic goals that they identify?
So happy to take that question. And thank you for asking. We are, as I mentioned in the opening, we're 2 months old. We're nationally based, and we serve members. And our platform is based on 3 core tenets, and one is direct member services. Again, we're in early days, but a lot of this is to the point that Kendra just made in terms of we serve rural entrepreneurs exclusively, and rural is based on the census definition of 50,000, a community that has 50,000 or less residents, and that is our pure focus. And it's really a place where we provide community for those entrepreneurs, because the truth of the matter is what we experience and what we face in terms of challenges is different than an urban entrepreneur. And as I always say, that doesn't mean that our experience is better or harder or worse, et cetera. It's just different. And so the chamber exists in an effort to provide that umbrella place for folks who are running businesses in those communities to convene and support each other. And one of the visions for the chamber is to also be able to provide targeted funding that's specifically for rural entrepreneurs. And another piece of our work is focused on public policy advocacy and social advocacy. And again, early days in terms of what we're able to do around those issues, but we have big plans in relation to both of those platforms. So I don't know if any of you have been a part of any of our events so far, but our inaugural event was a convening of a sit-in member of Congress and a former senator and ambassador, and we talked about racial reconciliation in rural communities. That was our inaugural event, and so it was a safe space for folks to come together just to hear views about how we go forward on racial issues and racial reconciliation. And another example is we're hosting the new Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development next week to talk about some public policy issues that affect specifically rural Americans. So the goal is an exclusive focus on rural entrepreneurs, rural business leaders, and rural issues. And if that doesn't answer the question, let me know. Happy to speak in more detail about that. We actually held an event that I was pretty proud of too last week, where we convened 3 rural entrepreneurs throughout the country, and it was largely just to talk about their journey from a big city to a rural town to start a business. And that to me was a great example of why we exist. It's just to talk about those challenges, the pain points, where we can go for money and resources, and how do we support each other. It was a prime example of why the Rural Chamber is a new entity and the need for it.
So thank you so much for that. Up next, we have another question from Jason Alvis. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but this is actually going to be for Lance. So Jason worked for the Washington State Department of Veteran Affairs, and he worked with rural employment for veterans. He's understanding your statement. Do you have thoughts on what resources are needed when you think about employing traditionally disenfranchised employees? Rural America, at least among veterans, has a much higher employment or employed not sinking population. This again in veterans has been characterized as a lack of access, not a lack of willingness to find employment. Think again about veterans. Some of the increased access is around incorporating mental health or healthcare access into employment and or open dialogue around some of the military related barriers that have led to unemployment in the past.
Yeah, great question. And I am no expert on veteran affairs. I will say our founder and my fellow co-owner is a combat veteran from Vietnam. So he, intimately understands the mental health issues, and where we focus there in our community, and is really around getting the delegation. When you're in a small state population-wise in Montana and you employ rural people, generally you can get your delegations here. And so with the delegations here, as well as the governor and the legislature, we are constantly, I would say, asking them to fully fund mental health resources, because we have employees, we have potential employees who could be exceptional, but they need help. They need professional resources to help them get through some key core problems in their lives. And so that's I would say, along with, again, you're tired of hearing me saying this, but broadband, that is a core issue we're constantly battling, because they're constantly defunding mental health resources in small towns, and it's extremely frustrating. And where we can, obviously in our small town, we've employed a few veterans, through the years. And we make it very well known that Mike, again, my fellow co-owner and founder of the company, is a veteran.
Thank you so much, Lance, for that answer. Up next, we have another question from Laura. She says that she works with the CDFI with a strong social mission, which is good jobs, environmentally sustainable enterprises, shared property. She's wondering if any of the panelists could speak about the role of financing and capital. Is this a barrier? And are there socially responsible investors, lenders that have helped you all?
Shared prosperity, although that could be shared property as well.
Yeah, I can share our experience. So we have, so in terms of our local banks, it's, we obviously work with local banks, and they provide a lot of our working capital. So in other words, lines of credit. And I think what I've learned in working with them through the years is essentially, again, I know this sounds cliche, but building really good working relationships with them. So they feel very comfortable about the risk of actually, setting up a line of credit for a company that does internet, which is kind of scary to them, and that competes globally, and also, and is in a very rural environment. The second point I would make is we've worked with a company called Alaska Growth Capital. Alaska Growth Capital primarily focuses on Alaska and Montana, but they're starting to branch out. And they are an SBA 7A lender. And what SBA 7A, as you all probably know, is enables entrepreneurs like us to get uncollateralized capital. And that's really key to kind of take a company to the next level, right? Because you can continue kind of going along, but as I said, we want to continue to grow because it makes the company more defensible, and we want to continue to grow because we can, we add jobs. And so we have found, we've used it twice, SBA 7A, and we have found it to be a great use of capital. What I'm also trying to do, at least in Montana, is with the venture capitalists who do Invest in Montana is to help them understand, as well as my peer CEOs, that they don't necessarily need to have, especially now, everyone in what are the major cities of Montana, Bozeman, Missoula, et cetera. They can have, a base there, but then again, this concept of hub and spoke, and have some other core functions that are in smaller towns, because they're just, again, as we all recognize and know, fantastic people who work hard and who are incredibly impactful to the company.
And Laura, one thing I would add, and in terms of your question too, is just, one thing that the chamber will hopefully sooner than later start to take the lead on in terms of conversations and thought leadership, is around the fact that entrepreneurship goes far beyond tech, right? And when we think about that, is how do we make sure that funding follows that thinking, so that some of the VCs start to think about, some smart investments in rural America and within rural entrepreneurship that's not necessarily tech or app development related. I know that's an uphill battle, but I think that's a part of, I know it's an important conversation that needs to be had, and it will be centered to our mandate.
And so those were the questions that were in the chat. I wasn't sure if you wanted to go ahead and open it up to everybody else if they had any other questions.
Sure.
So any participants, if you would like to go ahead and unmute yourselves to ask a question or post it inside of the chat, you are more than welcome to at this moment.
I will add one other thing, and this is it's a bit beyond scope of the topic of this discussion, but it's something that's also on the minds of both on my mind and also the board of directors for the Rural Chamber, and we plan to do some programming around this. And it really relates to the as rural entrepreneurs, especially in this moment in this country, just with so many topics that are underway in relation to the mental health toll that's taken to be a part of an entrepreneurial journey. And so what we see in terms of a lot of written material and even spoken, the spoken medium, is a lot of this is focused on on the big cities and the entrepreneurs in the tech space. And we want to be sure that the rural entrepreneurs and rural business leaders are also a part of this conversation, because it's real and we know it. And we just want to be sure that that topic is inclusive and that we're in scope. And so I do think that's somewhat related to this topic, though, in terms of the social impact that we have as business leaders in small town USA. So just, I guess I offer that to say, to be on the lookout for some of that work. And we we'll, looking for input partners to sort of get some of that information out there into the ether. But happy to take any questions that anyone else might have.
So it doesn't look like there are any more questions that anybody has. So I'm not sure if you all have any wrap up comments. Oh, here we go. Sharon Sappington would like to hear from you all about your thinking about developing a regional entrepreneur ecosystem in terms of education, access to capital, and networking between experienced folks.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big question. In terms of the entrepreneur ecosystem, what I've seen that's been successful in Montana is, number one, and I know this sounds so pre-COVID, but getting together. people, like all of us who live in rural communities, we like to get together. It's important, and it's really important to set up a support system and a consistent level of events, et cetera. And it might be programming, events. It might be just sharing events. But I think that's an initial first step that's extremely important. I think also developing an angel list of potential angels in that area, and making sure it's a real list, it's a directory, people can access it, is also very important, because that's where you're gonna, obviously get initial capital. I think the other aspect around education, of course, and again, this is nothing new, but how do you tap into, the universities that might be in the region, and in terms of pipeline for both, not only graduates, but also interns. We've had a great success in hiring interns from Montana State. And 2 of them actually, 12 years later, still work for the company. And so that's extremely important, because it enables you to kind of have access to, not only the skilled talent, which goes across, at least for our business, design, computer science, et cetera, but it also just gets you tapped into other, companies that are navigating that university system in terms of access and in terms of talent. But those would be kind of my initial thoughts around, building the entrepreneur ecosystem.
Perfect. And on a more personal, I would like to kind of know, as you have adjusted to the pandemic, in what ways did you find yourself kind of hitting a roadblock? And what ways would you advise other entrepreneurs who are just starting out to kind of push through that, or any advice that you have for them whenever they're kind of hitting a fork in the road?
From my own personal experience, I moved to this area maybe 6 months before, or maybe it's like 9 months before COVID hit. And so I had a small pop-up shop inside of a yoga studio. And of course, when COVID happened, that was shut down. My business model did not include an online component. In fact, I actively did not include, it was on purpose. I wanted to really work one-on-one in the community, very small. And that was a total joke. So that wasn't possible. So I think, even with the stress of everything that's going on, and the uncertainty of entrepreneurship in rural America, it's a really, for me as a creative, a really fun time to innovate, and for lack of better words, get creative about what you can do. So when my physical shop was shut down, I had to pivot to online, but mostly what I was doing was, again, I was going back to teaching and educating in an online space. So how can I take what I was doing in person and transfer that to online? Now looking at what are my revenue streams now that a physical space wasn't available at that time. That was when I pivoted into farming, and now I'm a registered herbal farm. So some things happened because I couldn't do what I had originally planned to do. It's frustrating. I laid on the couch and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm sad, all of these things that just were very emotional for me. So I don't want to just plow through and just be find some other ways to do it. No, it sucks, and it's depressing, and it's frustrating, and it's infuriating, but get creative, get innovative, try something that you didn't think was going to work for your business, and see what comes of it. is kind of the best thing as you kind of hit those roadblocks into capacity, into all the things that you need to have if you're a person who has like a physical product or a physical space. If you're someone who has a service and can't meet one-on-one, like what things can you do instead of focusing on what you can't do? Because that list is very long right now.
And I would add to that too, and this goes back to a point that Jennifer made early. It's you know, show up for each other and really lean on each other. And that sounds very simple, but I think it's incredibly powerful. And I think that so many of us are so in our business, running it every day to be sure it survives, that we forget to look up sometimes and realize the power that we can find amongst each other. So I know community is an incredibly overused word, but I think that it can be everything in moments like this where we're all trying to figure out, to your point, Kendra, how to pivot and how to move forward in innovative ways. So I think it's crowdsourcing information, leaning on your people, leaning on community, talking to people, and being open. That would be my one suggestion.
One of the things that they did, that Iowa Economic Development Authority, which really has a focus on rural in our state, they created something called Shop Iowa, which was basically a website that was geared toward brick and mortar rural businesses that did not have a web presence. And so people could take pictures of their product, upload it, and have this hub that people, in other states and Des Moines who really wanted to like put their money into supporting some of these rural businesses could do, which was an awesome resource for the state. I think they're keeping it up for another couple of years, but it's helped transition some of the older shops that didn't really want to have a digital presence, or people who just didn't have the resources to make that transition. It's kind of helped them to move into that space more, which has been really nice.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for those responses. And it looks like we have about 18 minutes left. So if you had any questions or wrap up comments that the panelists you all wanted to go ahead and make, we could go ahead and move into that.
That was all of the, am I on? That was, I covered most of the prepared questions that I had. And to Jennifer, Lance, and Kendra, if there are any other comments or thoughts that you'd like to offer, that would be great. But Tyler, those were all of the questions that I wanted to be sure that we hit. Except that, Jennifer, I will piggyback on what you just said in terms of Shop Iowa, and just put in a plug for the chamber and saying that we're also planning to launch a shop rule. And so that will be a online shop storefront to feature any product or service that our rural chamber members make or produce. And so we won't ship, we won't do fulfillment, but it's a place where we can showcase the products and services that exist from our members. And we're thrilled and excited about that. In an effort to encourage consumers to be mindful in terms of how they spend their money and what businesses they support. Anything else, Tyler? That was all that I had, and so happy to answer any other questions that come through. And I apologize, I thought we only had an hour.
No worries. It looks like we're not getting any more comments or questions, so I think it'd be a good time to go ahead and do any wrap-up comments that you may all have.
Yeah. Did either of you want to offer any? Did you have any closing comments or remarks?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for participating, and I learned a lot from Kendra and Jennifer, and want to come and visit and see what you're doing. It's really cool.
And I would echo that and just saying thank you so much to Tyler and the Rural Assembly for this event, which is always fantastic, and for having us for this go at it. What an honor and a privilege. And we look forward to doing more work with you all in the months and years to come. And thank you to everyone who tuned in for this conversation.